Well, hello again. And this is Jim Ransom bringing you another episode of Morning Jim Poetry. I'm sitting here in my kitchen in Edgeworth, Pennsylvania, to be specific. And today we're going to read some poems by Sylvia Plath and her sometime husband, Ted Hughes. These two were contemporaries and were married to each other for several years. They had 2 children together and wrote a lot of poetry. Sadly, Sylvia suffered from what is now called bipolar disorder. And at age 20, she made an unsuccessful attempt at suicide. She was hospitalized and underwent electric shock therapy, which was just coming into being at that time, and was very successful for her, as it actually was for most depressives back in those days and much beyond them. Both Hughes and Plath were prolific poets. I suspect they felt at times in competition with one another, but turns out that was not the cause of their separation. Here's one of Sylvia's poems. It's from the New York Book of Poems, the New Yorker Book of Poems. And this is a big volume. It has a lot of poets in it. And the poems are printed according to the subject matter, not to the alphabetical names of the authors or time sequence or anything sensible like that. Anyway, I've enjoyed this book and had it for many years. Blackberrying by Sylvia Plath. Nobody in the lane, and nothing but blackberries. Blackberries on either side, though on the right mainly, a blackberry alley going down in hooks, and a sea somewhere at the end of it, heaving. Blackberries big as the ball of my thumb, and dumb as eyes, ebon in the edges and in the hedges, fat with blue-red juices. These they squander on my fingers. I had not asked for such a blood sisterhood. They must love me. They accommodate themselves to my milk bottle, flattening their sides. Overhead go the choughs in black cacophonous flocks, bits of burnt paper wheeling in a blown sky. Theirs is the only voice, protesting. I do not think the sea will appear at all. The high green meadows are glowing as if lit from within. I come to one bush of berries so ripe, it is a bush of flies, hanging their green-blue bellies and their wing panes in a Chinese screen. The honey fust of the berries has stunned them. They believe in heaven. One more hook and the berries and bushes end. The only thing to come now is the sea. From between 2 hills, a sudden wind funnels at me, slapping its phantom laundry in my face. These hills are too green and sweet to have tasted salt. I follow the steep path between them. A lost hook brings me to the hill's northern face, and the face is orange rock that looks out on nothing but a great space of white and pewter lights, and a din like silversmiths beating at an intractable metal. That's blackberrying. And a few points need to be made. That last couplet of white and pewter lights and a din like silversmiths beating and beating at an intractable metal. That's the sea that she's trying to describe to us. And then you'll notice that she uses the word hook a couple of times. And what she means by that is a sharp curve in the path that she's walking. And then choughs flying in the sky. That's another word for blackbirds. And so when you know that, I guess it makes the poem a little easier to understand. But it's a beautiful lyric poem about picking blackberries, actually. Blackberries as big as the ball of my thumb, and dumb as eyes, ebon in the hedges, fat with blue-red juices. In other words, the blackberries are looking out at her as if they were eyes made of ebony in the hedges. And this is what the blackberries to her look like. These they squander, the blue-red juices squander on my fingers. I had not asked for such a blood sisterhood. They must love me, meaning the blackberries. So, as we look at this poem in detail, we become a little more friendly with it because her language is not what most of us would pick to describe blackberries, but it's beautiful. It's very well done. And that's Blackberrying by Sylvia Plath. Now, let's go to Ted Hughes. A little word about Sylvia and Ted. They had a somewhat stormy marriage, and a lot of that was due to Sylvia's strangeness, shall we say. But they weren't divorced until Ted took up with a younger woman. How many times has that happened in life to people? But of course, Ted was not a great one to marry, I guess, because that second marriage, he married this other woman eventually, and that also failed. But this is not a marriage counseling lecture. This is supposed to be a poetry reading, so here's one by Ted Hughes called Bullfrog. With their lifelong strong legs, some frogs are able to thump upon double bass strings, though pond water deadens and clogs. But you, bullfrog, you pump out whole fogs full of horn, a threat as of a liner looming. True that, first hearing you, disgorging your gouts of darkness like a wounded god, not utterly fantastical, I expected, as in some antique tale depicted, a broken down bull up to its belly in mud, sucking swamp black water up, belching out black cloud, and a squall of gudgeon and flies. A surprise now to see you, a boy's prize, no bigger than a rat, with all dumb silence in your little old woman hands. Ted Hughes is known for close descriptions of animals. He was born in rural Yorkshire, England, and he always had a close acquaintance with the country, earth, and all the things that lived on it or in it. So that's his description of a bullfrog. So you can see this in another one of his short poems, which I'm going to turn to now. It's called The Lake, I believe. Yeah, The Lake by Ted Hughes. Better disguised than the leaf insect, a sort of subtler armadillo, the lake turns with me as I walk, snuffles at my feet for what I might drop or kick up, sucks and slaughters the stones, snorts through its lips. Into broken glass smacks its chops. It has eaten several my size without developing a preference, prompt with a splash to whatever I offer. It ruffles in its wallow or lies sunning, digesting old, senseless bicycles and a few shoes. The fish down there do not know they have been swallowed, any more than the girl out there who, over the stern of a rowboat, tests its depth with her reflection. How the outlet fears it, dragging it out, black and yellow, a maniac eel, battering it to death with sticks and stones. The originality of that is sometimes brings you up short. The little girl looking over the stern of a rowboat tests its depth with her reflection. How the outlet fears it, fears the lake, dragging it out, black and yellow, a maniac eel. He likens the stream of water flowing from the lake to be a maniac eel, battering it to death with sticks and stones. That's his description of the runout of the water from the lake. Well, whether you like his poetry or not, you have to give him credit for highly original thinking about lakes and animals and describing them in detail in his poems, but with a very original viewpoint. Plath married Hughes when she went to England after successful treatment for her first depressive episodes. She was already sort of in the early stages of making a name for herself as a poet. And so then they were married in 1956. It's hard to say what effect the marriage had on the poetry of either Sylvia or Ted. Certainly, Sylvia Plath created many of her best poems in the early 1960s, which would have been after her divorce from Ted Hughes. But then, of course, it wasn't long until she successfully committed suicide, this time by sticking her head in an oven, which was fueled with what was known in those days as city gas, not the same as the natural gas that we use today for cookery. Actually, I find it hard to connect with either Hughes or Plath. But let's admit and be aware that they both grew up and did a lot of their writing in the days after the Second World War. I'll get it right, and and then during the edge of the Depression. Those were tough times for people to live, and certainly they were both great poets, but probably shouldn't have been married to each other. I don't think anybody believes that the marriage created a better poetry emanating from either of them. I'm sorry about Sylvia Plath dying at the age of 30. That was a real sad thing. We can only speculate what kind of poetry she might have written later in her life. Most likely her rather cynical view of life would not have changed. Her style was described by former U.S. Poet Laureate Robert Pinsky, writing about her in the New York Times Book Review, as being thrashing, hyperactive, perpetually accelerated. The poems of Sylvia Plath catch the feeling of a profligate, hurt imagination, throwing off images and phrases right and left. Sylvia Plath was a product of a marriage between Professor Plath, a German professor. I don't know whether he was Jewish or not, but he took his family. Sylvia was the daughter of another professor who, and they both moved in the 30s to America, where she received most of her education. And her father died fairly young, and Sylvia Plath had mixed feelings about him. Her mother was a teacher at a college as well, so Sylvia Plath never really lacked for some funding, and she was such a great poet at an early age that she got scholarships to attend Smith College and did well in her professional life. As did Ted Hughes. He died much later from cancer, and at that time he was married to his third or fourth wife. I'm not sure which. But anyway, these are some of the poems of Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes, neither of whom is around anymore to write poetry, but in their time, they were some of the stars in the firmament of poetry. Okay, that's it. See you again next week. Bye now.